Oh, what's that? You can't hear me? Well, these masks suck. What can I say? How's that? A little better? Super. Hi. I've been asked by some of my friends to address an issue that has been popping up over and over and over and over and over again on Facebook. Masks. Currently, we're working with the COVID crisis. Just as a background, actually, first of all, a little disclaimer. Anything I say represents my own professional and personal opinions, does not represent, reflect, or am I in no way endorsed by any employer or other official organization. In fact, I'm wearing my very old NDSU shirt over my tunic so that you can't actually see my official logo and ID. I'm a respiratory therapist. I have been a registered respiratory therapist since 1988. I've been in the field since 1980 or thereabouts, I forget, a long time ago. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the masks, the current situation. If you're looking for information on whether or not the masks are effective, we're not going to go into that in any depth right now. Suffice to say, I am going to touch on it briefly. For those of you who are curious, the mask I'm wearing here is one of my personal items I keep. It is not manufactured by this company. I just have that on there for decoration. This is an N99 mask. It has a silicone rubber seal all the way around for an effective mask seal, which is, by the way, the number one problem with masks that people wear is the leak around them. And a separate exhalation port in the center, so it's low restriction, and a very large filtration area that's NIOSH certified to filter out 99% of the particles. We're not going to go into particle size and stuff right now. And these are the masks everybody's wearing. They're not useless. But they're more useful for other people to be wearing than you if you're concerned about your own health. We'll discuss that another time. The mask we're going to be referring to today is the one that everybody is probably basically familiar with, the N99 mask. Or N95, I'm sorry, the N95 mask. Now, why it got this designation and what that means would get into the weeds, so we're going to skip it. What we're going to do is we're going to talk today about CO2. And oxygen. And in order to address that, we're going to have to do a little bit of anatomy. And I think it's important that people understand that the memes you're seeing on Facebook, some of them have a grain of truth in them. Some of them are just a whole lot of exclamation points and bold lettering that means essentially nothing. But you cannot possibly, in a paragraph in a meme, explain what's going on with CO2 and O2 and all of these things in the human body as relates to masks. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go old school. We're going to use black and white illustrations, and I'm going to fumble around with a couple of markers here, and we're going to get right to work. First thing, a lot of these memes are talking about CO2 poisoning. Okay. CO2 poisoning is not something you out there in the streets need to worry about, all right? If you're a scuba diver, you know all about it. They teach you about it in school. Normal atmospheric pressure out there walking around the street, even with a mask on, no, it's not a problem. With a person with normal physiology, normal cardiorespiratory system, even people with some degree of compromise cardiorespiratory, it's not an issue. The atmosphere around you is primarily nitrogen. The oxygen, commonly referred to as 21% of the atmosphere. It's actually about 20.95%, but who cares about 0.05 of 1%, right? The CO2 level is about 0.04 of 1% in the air around you. It's a small number. That's why when they refer to it in reference to climate change or CO2 emissions from man-made sources, they talk about it in parts per million. It's a handier unit for dealing with it. And we're talking hundreds of parts per million. So you can tell that's a small percentage. Now, people are telling you that you're rebreathing CO2 in your mask and it's bad for you. That's not really correct. At the very, very least, it's a vast oversimplification. The fact of the matter is that the volumes and percentages you're talking about are relatively easily handled. Now, somebody asked me about people wearing masks getting headaches. I would suspect that a fair percentage of the people getting headaches, and of course there's no one answer for every situation, but it probably is simply because those masks, even like ones like this is annoying to wear on your face for any length of time. It just is. And one of these, they're annoying. You're rebreathing hot air. It's the heat and humidity that we can find annoying, and also the bands around your ears or around your neck. At work, I wear basically a 100% effective powered filtration unit when I'm working with COVID patients, which I do a lot. And they give me a headache. And I'm not rebreathing any air. I'm breathing cool, fresh, filtered air. But having something on your head to strap around like this and there's all this stuff dangling, it gives me a headache. It gives a lot of my coworkers headaches. It's one of our chief complaints about these machines. They keep us safe, but they're a pain in the head, if you will. No, CO2, okay? Let's talk volumes. When you breathe in oxygen, when you breathe in air, now we're going to talk about physiologically a normal adult male human, all right? When you breathe in, you're inhaling what we call a vital capacity. That is the normal, from your vital capacity, you're breathing in the tidal volume. Tidal volume. It's the normal tidal breathing. Your normal respiratory rate. You're breathing like I'm breathing right now. You don't notice it. It happens to you and everyone around you, so you don't normally notice other people's breathing or your own. Adult males breathing roughly 500 cc's for a tidal volume. That's half a liter, okay? 500 cc's. Now, when you breathe in, that 500 cc's is not all going to get utilized by your body, all right? Because the air is coming from up here, right? You're inhaling. All of this here, the nasal passages, the oropharynx, the trachea, and the branches, all those branches in this vastly oversimplified drawing are anatomical dead space. The air that gets in there and doesn't get all the way down to the tiny little air sacs, the alveoli, does not exchange gas. There's no interchange of gases between the blood and that air. 150 cc's of that 500, roughly 30% of it, ain't doing anything. It's just there. Why is this important? Because when you exhale, that 500 goes back out. After you've exhaled your normal depth, there's 150 cc's that's dead space. It's doing nothing for you. It's just there. Okay, 150 cc's. Now, why is that a big deal? I took one of these masks, waterproofed it. I filled it with water, partially full of water, and then I literally stuck my face in it and adjusted it, lifted my face out. My face displaced most of the water. What was left, I measured. Best test, 35 cc's. That's how much space, and water, cc is a cc, whether it's water or uncompressed air, 35 cc's. So, if this space here represents 150 cc's, 150 cc's, 35 cc's. Boy, that's looking great, isn't it? You've got 35 cc's. That's 185 cc's. All right. Now, you can see where this is headed already, can't you? When you exhale, the air that you exhale, that last stuff that comes out before you inhale again, represents end tidal. Tidal volume and tidal. That's the last air you exhale is a representative of the gas exchange in your lungs. I'm oversimplifying here, but that's it. That air, which went in at 21% oxygen and a few hundredths of a percent CO2, comes out approximately 16% oxygen and 5 to 6% CO2. 5 to 6%, remember that, all right? Interesting, 21 went in, 16 came out, 6% CO2. The O2 just came back out again, it just hooked up with some carbon, went on a date. Now, if you do the numbers real quick, that 6% represents about 9 cc's. Of that 150 that's left there, that dead space, that's about 9 cc's, all right? So, of the 150, 9 cc's. Now, the 35 cc's that's caught in here is the same gas composition, all right? It stopped in front of your face, and a little bit, the CO2 diffuses rapidly, but a little bit, let's just say that none does, for the case. Now, if you run the numbers, that 35 cc's, of that, the amount that is actually CO2 is about 2.1 cc's. That means 11.1 cc's of 185 cc's is CO2. Now, number-wise, you're talking 23% increase, okay? So when you inhale, you'd say, oh, that's 23% more CO2 than I would normally be inhaling. Because remember, that 150 cc's, that's anatomical dead space. And for those of you out there who will say, well, what about physiologic dead space because you got a little education? In a normal adult, without other compromise, that's a negligible number. We can safely ignore it. That 150 cc's that's here has to get sucked back in. When your diaphragm tightens up, negative pressure is created, the air gets sucked back in. 500 cc's comes in, but the first 150 is that stuff that you didn't exhale completely. Okay? Now, the air coming in is 21%. It mixes because of turbulent flow with the 16%. You get a number creeping up on 20-some percent. Anyway, it may look like, well, you've increased it by percentage, 23%. What you're dealing with in actuality is a number that your body doesn't really care too much about. And I'll tell you why. All right? Because, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Here's your heart. Sorry, it's not in color. The aortic arch coming out of your heart. There are bodies, little biological sensors God put there that detect all sorts of things about your blood as it goes by. And one of the amazing things they can do is they can detect the oxygen and CO2 levels in your blood. Now, the oxygen detectors are not real efficient or real fast, but the ones that can detect CO2, and I'm oversimplifying because it's a very complex procedure here, matter of fact, really, the lung is short of the human brain, is the most amazing organ you can imagine. The complexity and intricacy of this system is just mind-bending. These little bodies detect the CO2 level. If you go from inhaling 150 cc's of air with 9 cc's of it being CO2 at 4 to 6%, now you add 35 cc's of that, so you're 25% more air of the first breath has got more CO2 in it. You breathe, gas exchange takes place, circulation takes it around, it zips past these aortic bodies, and they go, hey, there's a little more CO2 in the air, because you took a breath, the same breath, and there's a little higher CO2. Now, mind you, this is a very small change in the CO2. It also changes the acid-base status, which affects a whole bunch of things we can't get into. It's amazing. Those bodies send a message to the brainstem, okay, the pons and medulla, where the respiratory center is located. And they say, excuse me, we got a little more CO2 in the blood than we really want. And the respiratory center dials up the diaphragm and says, hey, we're going to need to take a little deeper breath next time. Maybe you want to kick in the accessory muscles a little bit, just give it a little boost. And if that doesn't work, we're going to step the respiratory rate up just a teeny bit. Short, you're going to be breathing slightly deeper, possibly slightly faster. And your next breath after that one, CO2 levels will be back to where they were originally, because the body automatically compensates breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat, every time. It will feel like you're working harder to breathe, slightly, especially if you're very sensitive to things like that. It's not that there's something wrong, it's just the system compensating. Now, you wonder, well, you're having to breathe harder. Okay, the subject has come up, well, you're having to take, All right, here's where we get into the really interesting part, if you're still with me. Remember I said tidal volume? Tidal volume is where it's at, baby. Okay, here we go. This, from this line to this line, represents the total lung capacity. That's as much air as your lungs hold, right? This squiggly up and down line here represents your vital capacity. 500 cc's, half a liter, out of something in excess of 5 liters. About 10 to 15%, depending on the person. There's variations. Now your body, your respiratory center says take a deeper breath. You got this right here. Inspiratory reserve capacity, okay, or volume, excuse me, inspiratory reserve volume. See, I say it wrong too. This ability to take a deeper breath, the tidal volume's half a liter, you got 2.5 liters here. 5 times, roughly 4 to 6 times, but 5 times the number, you can take a deeper breath. And if that doesn't do it, you have this, the expiratory reserve volume. And that runs up to a liter, about 1,200 cc's, 1.2 liters. So if you have to take a deeper breath, you can breathe faster, you can breathe deeper, you can forcefully exhale, which is a little less efficient, but it still gets the stuff out, takes in room. This entire section here is called vital capacity. When you add up all of these volumes that you can move of air, this is how much you've actually got to work with. Now, if you add up 4 liters, 1.2 liters, and half a liter, what do you come up with? A heck of a lot when you compare that. You've got all this here to compensate for that extra 2.1 cc's of dead space, CO2. It's pretty simple. This little stuff down here is called residual volume. That's the air your lungs can't get rid of. That's about 1.2 liters also. You don't want to get rid of that, because if you do, your lungs basically go and they stick together and you can't inhale and you die. It's a bad thing. Okay. This is for a normal, physiologically normal human being. All right? Wearing masks is not comfortable. And I'm not addressing whether or not you should wear a mask. But I'm telling you, if you don't have some sort of other compromise, your body is easily able to compensate, to work a little harder. Yes, it feels like a little more work. All right, it does. But as far as CO2 poisoning, somebody out there knows more than me. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But I don't see it happening at normal atmospheric pressure in a physiologically normal adult. It just doesn't. Oxygen levels, people say, well, wait a minute, you get back that 16%. Well, that's another 35 cc's that only have 16% oxygen. That's true. That's absolutely true. But remember, your body's compensating. It's not taking another 2 cc breath. It's taking a breath that's probably 35 to 50 cc's deeper. Okay, so you're increasing your tidal volume by maybe 10%. You'll notice the work. You may even feel like that's making you short of breath. Short of breath is a feeling that represents additional work above your normal workload to breathe for the circumstances you find yourself under. And it's physiologically normal. That's where we're at. Anyway, I'm going to try and clean this video up a little bit when I get a chance. If not, I might just release it raw. I hope you bear with me. I'm still researching the particle size issues, and there's a whole other issue about that, because you're not just dealing with the size of the particles, you're dealing with polarization, you're dealing with dispersion, the diffusion of particles in specific particle size ranges. COVID-19 runs like 70 to 90 nanometers. It's not a real big virus. But that is not the only factor that affects whether or not a mask stops it. The single largest problem with masks, I will address that, far and away, regardless of the type of mask, is fit. Because if you do not have an absolutely tight seal, something like this works. These masks they're comfortable to breathe in, they're not comfortable to wear because they're a little bit heavy. And they make you sound like one of those guys who was trying to kill Batman in one of the movies. That's all I got to say. Be well, folks. Take care, and let me know if you have any questions about the subject. Thanks.